Hello and welcome. This is the Well Paid Geek from wellpaidgeek.com. Today you're going to learn about ES6 destructuring.
So what is destructuring? Destructuring makes working with object literals and arrays easier. It allows us to easily extract properties from objects and elements from arrays into variables in a very clear way. There's even extended functionality that allows for renaming and setting defaults for extracted values. Okay, we're going to start with the simplest possible example of object destructuring, and then we're going to build upon that by adding more and more functionality and learning more and more about the feature as we go. Okay, so here we've got a very simple object literal. It contains or represents a person, so I've called it person. Here we've got logPersonInfo. It's a function that takes a person and then just logs out the first name and the last name to the console. Call it down here. As expected, we get Matt Smith. Now we've got this syntax here. It's called object dereferencing, where we access a particular property of an object, in this case person last name and person first name. Now in a small function like this where we only use each one once, typing out the whole thing, person.first name, person.last name, basically keeping on typing person dot, isn't too bad because we only do it a couple of times. But imagine, if you will, that this was a much larger function and we're using the first name and last name property all the time. We don't really want to have to keep typing out person dot all the time. It's just a little bit too verbose. It's hard on the fingers. So a way to solve this is to use destructuring. If we destructure the person object, this code can become a lot more concise. So let's do that. To destructure and extract the values, we do declaring a new variable, and then we do, within these curly brackets, we do a comma separated list of all the properties we want to extract from the object. So in this case, it's first name and last name. And then we just do equals and then the object we want to destructure. So now we have two variables in this scope, first name and last name, and their values are the corresponding properties, named first name and last name, in the person object. So since we have them as variables, we can get rid of this dereferencing. And we can just do that. And if we clear and run, the result will be Matt Smith again. There we go. We can actually make this even more concise. You can destructure objects that are arguments to functions right within the parameter list. That would basically mean we take this destructuring operator, and we just put it in place of the object we want to destructure in the argument list, in this case person. So the function just gets the first name and last name properties from person. So if we clear that, again we should get Matt Smith. There should be no change. There we go. Okay, now we're going to get a little bit more advanced and we're going to look at how we can destructure nested objects. Okay, so again we have our person object here. It's a bit different this time. The shape of the object has changed slightly and we have this location property, whereas previously it was a string. It's now a nested object with a country property and the string UK. So we want to pass this to logPersonInfo, and it logs the first name and then person.location.country. You can see the output here. Okay, so let's destructure person like we did in the previous example. We've already seen how to do the first name. Very simple, first name like that. Things are slightly different when it comes to location because it's an object. If we just put location here, we get the location object, which is an object with a country property. We want to extract just the country. And the way we do that is we sort of mimic this nested structure here. So we go location, colon, and then in curly brackets, we put country. And you can see from the syntax highlighting here actually that we just get the country property, we don't get location. So we're just getting first name and country. So again, we can just remove the object dereferencing, clear it and run it again. And again, we should get Matt UK. That worked. Renaming values. Sometimes it's very handy to be able to rename the variables we've destructured from an object. An example of when this may be useful is when we would have conflicting variable names in the same scope if we just did a simple destructuring of multiple objects. That may sound hard to understand, but when we go to the code, you'll see it's actually very simple. Right, here we have two very simple objects, a person and a location object, which I've called geo. You'll note they've both got name properties. That's going to be relevant. So we've got log profile info here that logs out person.name and geo.name. The function takes the person and the geo. So let's go about destructuring these as we've seen before. So we want the name property from person, and then we want also the name property from geo. I think you can see the problem here. We can't have two different variables both called name. That's an error. It doesn't work. So what do we do? Are we stuck? Can we not do destructuring? Luckily, the clever people that came up with the destructuring feature have thought about this, and they've given us a way to rename any property values which we extract from objects using destructuring. It's really simple. You just do property name on the object, then colon, and then whatever you want to rename that property to. So I'll rename person.name to person name and geo.name to geo name. So now we've got a person name and a geo name variable. So in here, we can just change this, change that, and the result should be that we output Matt Smith London. Yeah, we've successfully renamed our properties when destructuring them. Using default values. Now we're going to see how you can assign default values when destructuring an object. These will be used when a property we want to extract is undefined. Here we go back to our very first example of simple object destructuring. We've got the logPersonInfo function, and it uses the destructuring syntax to extract the first name and last name from a person object passed to it. In this case, we've got both the first name and last name, so they both get printed out. But what happens if we remove the last name from the object? I'll clear that to make it more obvious. Okay, so we get Matt and undefined because last name here is undefined on the object now. So we can actually, in this case, give last name a default value. If you've seen my video on, what was it? It was the ES6 function arguments, where you can have default function arguments. We can give properties that are destructured from an object defaults in exactly the same way. The syntax is the same. You just put equals and then whatever you want the default to be, we'll call it Doe. So now, because last name is undefined, we should get Matt Doe printed out. And we do. So just, it's worth noting that if we put the last name back in, the default Doe will no longer be used because last name is not undefined. The default only gets used if the last name is undefined. Let's just check that. yeah, we're back to Matt Smith again, and the default doe is ignored. Destructuring arrays. Okay, so destructuring works on arrays as well as objects. The syntax is a little different, but it's still very similar as destructuring objects. Let's take a look at that now. Here we've got an array called people. It's just a list of people's names. And down here, we want to log out the first and second item in that array. We extract those variables in the sort of traditional JavaScript way of doing it. So we access each individual array item using the indices in square brackets after the array's name. So we've got people 0, people 1. We put those in variables, we log them out. The result will be Matt David. There you go. Now let's change this to get these two variables, person 1 and person 2, using array destructuring. So it's very much like object destructuring. We do a list of all the variable names you want to extract, but unlike with object destructuring, we use square rather than curly brackets to denote it's an array we're destructuring. We do person 1, person 2 from people. Clear that, run it again, and we should get Matt and David again. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so one of the things to note is arrays obviously don't have property names, unlike objects. So whatever we name the variable isn't relevant because we don't need to match it to any property name. What is relevant in terms of what we extract is their position in the list. So the first gets the first element, the second variable gets the second element. Okay, so what happens, say we want to skip an element, say we want to print out person 1 and person 3, or let's call it another person, and another person should be the third person in the list, Chris. We would just change this to another person, and then we just tell it that we want to skip an item. We want to skip David, the second item. So we just put in a comma here, and that will skip the second item in the array. And then when I rerun this, we should get Matt and Chris. Yeah, we do. You can skip any item. So say we just want another person. We want the third person. We would just skip the first item and the second item and just take the third person. Down here, and we should just get Chris. Yeah, that's correct. So obviously with object destructuring, you're able to rename the things you extract from the object. You can rename the variables. That doesn't make sense here because we're not dealing with property names, it's an array. But we do still, like with objects, get the ability to set default values. So obviously this array only has 3 items in. So if we try and get person 4, the fourth item, that's going to be undefined. But we can set a default value, call it Alex. And so when we log out person 3 and person 4, because there's no fourth person in the array, the default of Alex will be used. So we'll get Chris and Alex, or we should do, I hope we do. There we go, Chris and Alex. And that's array destructuring. Combining object and array destructuring. You can even combine array and object destructuring. A good use case is, for example, if you wanted to destructure an array of object literals. I've got an example of that now. Here we have an array. Each element in the array, there's 2 elements in the array. Each element in the array is an object, both representing a person. Let's say we want to extract, using destructuring, the first name from both elements in the array and then log that out. So we'll do console.log, and we'll call it person 1, person 2. We want that to be Matt and David. So this is where we combine the 2 different types of destructuring. So first, person's an array, so we destructure that. Sorry. And so what do we want to extract from it? Each thing that we're extracting from it, each item, is an object, and from that we want to destructure and extract a variable. So we do now object destructuring. So here we're destructuring the first item in the array, which is an object, so we use object destructuring. So we want the first name. And then again, the second item, also an object, and again, we want the first name. So sort of the outer brackets say we're destructuring an array. And then for each item, it's an object, so we're now destructuring an object, destructuring an object. You will have noticed we're going to run into the problem again of we've got two variables with the same name. We've already seen how to fix this. We can just rename the properties. We'll rename to person 1, rename the second one to person 2, and now when I run this, it should print out Matt and David. That worked correctly. And we're done. You've learned all you need to know about both array and object destructuring. I hope that all made sense. Please like this video because it makes me very, very happy. Also, I'm going to be putting out multiple video tutorials a week onto YouTube. So to make sure you don't miss any, please do subscribe to my channel. Also, I have various other web development articles on my blog. I'm updating that every week as well. So visit that at wellpaidgeek.com. And until next time, thanks for watching.